The grand chamber of the Galactic Council stretched so far that Ambassador David Reyes could not see where it ended. Thousands of seats rose in endless circles around him, climbing toward a ceiling that seemed to touch the stars themselves. Every seat was filled with creatures that defied human imagination. Some had scales that shimmered like liquid metal. Others floated in gravity bubbles, their bodies made of pure light. A few were so alien that David's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. He stood alone at the center of this impossible room. A single human, the first ever to stand before the full assembly of the Galactic Council. Behind him, through the transparent floor, he could see the cold void of space. Warships from a dozen species hung in the darkness, their weapons powered and ready. A reminder that humanity existed only because the Council allowed it. Supreme, Chancellor Morvith leaned forward from the highest throne. The Chancellor was ancient beyond measure, a being of twisted bone and shadow that had ruled the Council for longer than human civilization had existed. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. Human representative, you stand before the combined authority of 9,000 worlds. We have watched your species crawl from the mud of your small planet. We have observed your primitive wars and your clumsy attempts at space travel. Now you come to us with demands. David felt his heart pounding in his chest. Every instinct told him to run, to bow, to beg for mercy. But he had not come here to surrender. With respect, Chancellor, David said, keeping his voice steady, we did not come to make demands. We came to ask a question. A ripple of surprise moved through the assembly. Species that had not communicated in millennia turned to look at each other. No one spoke to the Supreme Chancellor in such a manner. Morvath's empty eyes fixed on the tiny human. You dare address us with conditions? Your species has been part of this council for only 40 years. You are infants in a galaxy of elders. 43 years, David corrected. And in those 43 years, we have followed every law you imposed on us. We have paid every tribute you demanded. We have accepted every restriction you placed on our technology. We have been, by every measure, obedient members of your community. He paused, letting his words settle over the chamber. And yet, he continued, 3 days ago, your enforcement fleet arrived at Earth without warning. They seized our research stations. They arrested our scientists. They destroyed laboratories that took us decades to build. All without explanation. The chamber fell silent. David could feel thousands of alien eyes boring into him. Supreme Chancellor Morvith rose from its throne, its body unfolding like a nightmare given form. Your species violated Statute 17 of the Founding Compact. You developed technology reserved exclusively for elder species. The consequences were clearly stated when your world joined the Council. What technology? David asked. What did we develop that was so dangerous? You know what you built, Morvith hissed. Do not play games with this assembly. David reached into his coat pocket. Immediately, security drones swung toward him, weapons charging. But he moved slowly, deliberately, and pulled out nothing more than a small crystal chip. This is a recording, he said, made by one of our scientists before your forces destroyed her laboratory. She was studying quantum communications, faster-than-light messaging. We thought it would help us stay connected across the distances of space. He held up the chip so the entire assembly could see it. But she found something else, something buried in the quantum fabric of reality itself, a pattern that was not natural, a code that someone had written into the very structure of the universe 4 million years ago. The reaction was immediate and violent. Elder species that had been watching with bored contempt suddenly came alive with alarm. The Chancellor's form flickered and distorted. Delegates began shouting in languages David's translator could not process. Silence. Morvith's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The chamber went quiet, but the tension remained. Thick and electric dot, the Chancellor descended from its throne, moving toward David with terrifying grace. You have made a grave error, human. Whatever your scientists thought they found, they were mistaken. There is nothing hidden in the quantum substrate. David did not step back. Then why are you afraid? Morvith stopped. For a long moment, nothing moved. We are not afraid, the Chancellor said slowly. We are protecting younger species from dangers they cannot understand. The restrictions exist for your own safety. This has always been true, has it? David asked. Or have the restrictions always existed to protect something else? To keep younger species from discovering what the Founders really did when they created the Council? He turned in a slow circle, addressing the entire assembly. My government sent me here with one purpose. Not to fight. Not to threaten. Simply to ask a question that the Galactic Council has never answered in 4 million years of existence. He faced the Chancellor again. What happened to the species that came before the Founders? The civilizations that existed before the Council was created? According to your own records, there were thousands of them. Advanced, intelligent, spread across the galaxy. And then, suddenly, they were gone. All of them. At exactly the same moment the Founders established the Council, David held up the crystal chip. We found their signals, Chancellor, buried in the quantum substrate, locked away behind barriers that someone built into reality itself. They are not extinct. They are imprisoned, and we have the key to set them free. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates screamed accusations at each other. Ships outside the chamber began moving into combat positions. The Chancellor's form blazed with dark energy dot, but David Reyes stood calm at the center of the storm, because somewhere across the galaxy, Earth was already broadcasting. The quantum barriers were already beginning to crack, and the voices that had been silenced for 4 million years were beginning to wake. He looked up at the raging Supreme Chancellor and smiled. The question is not whether Earth will release them, he said quietly. We already have. The question is what the Council plans to do when they arrive. Morvith let out a sound that was not quite a scream, and in the depths of space, ancient eyes opened for the first time in eons. Director Anna Kowalski had watched civilizations rise and fall in simulations. She had studied the mathematics of empire collapse, the physics of social decay. None of it had prepared her for this moment. She stood in the command center of the Geneva Deep Space Research Facility, watching Earth's sky fill with alien warships. Hundreds of them now, pouring through hyperspace portals that tore the Chur atmosphere like wounds in the fabric of reality. They are jamming all communications with the Council chamber, reported Commander James O'Duya from his station. Ambassador Reyes is on his own. He knew that was the plan, Anna said quietly. His job was to buy us time. The question is whether we have used that time wisely. She turned to the holographic display at the center of the room. It showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy, with thousands of points of light scattered across its spiral arms. Most of those lights were dim, barely visible. But as she watched, a few of them began to pulse with new energy. The broadcast is working, said Dr. Victor Andrade, the lead quantum physicist on her team. He was a thin man with tired eyes, but right now those eyes were alive with wonder. The barriers are breaking down. We are receiving responses from across the galaxy. How many? Anna asked. Victor checked his instruments, then checked them again. His face went pale. 317. No, 342. The number keeps climbing. 342 civilizations. Species that the Galactic Council had declared extinct millions of years ago. Locked away behind quantum barriers that no one was supposed to be able to break. until humanity found the key. Anna remembered the day Victor had come to her with his discovery. He had been shaking, barely able to speak. For months, his team had been working on faster-than-light communication, trying to send messages across the vast distances between stars without the delays that made real-time conversation impossible. They had succeeded, but in the process, they had detected something unexpected. Signals buried deep in the quantum substrate, hidden behind layers of encryption that should not have existed in nature. When they finally decoded those signals, they found voices. Thousands of them, crying out in languages that had not been spoken for eons, begging for someone to hear them. The Council's founders had not just created a government. They had created a prison, and every species that had developed too quickly, that had asked too many questions, that had threatened the founders' control, had been sealed away in quantum silence. Until now. Director. Commander Oduya's voice cut through her thoughts. Council enforcement ships are entering the atmosphere. They are heading directly for this facility. Anna looked at the tactical display. Dozens of vessels were descending toward Geneva, their weapons already charging. The Council was not coming to talk. They were coming to destroy every trace of what humanity had discovered. How long until they reach us? She asked. 17 minutes. Anna turned to Victor. Can you accelerate the broadcast? Wake more of them faster? Victor shook his head. The quantum barriers are ancient and complex. Breaking them down takes time. We have started the process, but it will be hours, maybe days, before all the imprisoned species are fully freed. We do not have hours. Anna stared at the incoming ships on the display. We have 17 minutes. There might be another way. A new voice spoke from across the room. Dr. Nadia Petrov, the youngest member of the research team, approached with a data tablet in her hands. When we analyzed the quantum substrate, we found that the barriers were not uniform. Some sections were weaker than others. There is a node, a central control point, that connects to all the barriers simultaneously. Where is it? Anna asked. Nadia pointed to a location on the galactic map. Anna felt her blood run cold. Directly beneath the Council's Grand Chamber, Nadia said. If Ambassador Reyes could access that node, he could accelerate the process. Free everyone at once. Reyes has no way to reach anything beneath the chamber, Commander Oduya said. He is alone in a room full of hostile aliens. By now, they have probably already detained him. Then we need to give him a chance. Anna made a decision in that moment. A decision that would change everything. Commander, I need you to take Dr. Andrade and Dr. Petrov to the emergency bunker. Protect the research. Make sure our broadcast continues no matter what happens to this facility. Oduya understood immediately. And what will you do? Anna looked at the incoming warships. I am going to draw their attention. Give our people across the planet time to scatter. Keep the broadcast running from multiple locations. Director, that is suicide. Perhaps. Anna moved to the main console and began entering commands. But if Ambassador Reyes can reach that node, none of this will matter. The imprisoned species will be freed. The Council's secrets will be exposed. And humanity will have changed the galaxy forever. She activated the facility's emergency protocols. Blast doors began to seal. Backup generators hung to life. Deep beneath the building, hidden transmitters started broadcasting humanity's message on every frequency. Go, she told her team. Now, Victor hesitated. Anna, there must be another way. There is no other way. She met his eyes. You found the truth, Victor. You gave us the key. Now I need you to survive long enough to make sure the truth cannot be buried again. The building shook as the first Council ships began their attack. Through the reinforced windows, Anna could see beams of energy cutting through the city. Reducing buildings to ash. Nadia grabbed Victor's arm and pulled him toward the exit. Commander Oduya followed, but he paused at the door and looked back. "It has been an honor, Director." "The honor was mine, Commander." "Now go." They disappeared into the emergency tunnels. Anna turned back to the console and watched the council ships approach. She had perhaps 5 minutes before they reached the facility. 5 minutes to draw their fire. 5 minutes to keep the broadcast running. 5 minutes to give David Reyes the chance he needed to change history. She opened a channel to every remaining station on Earth. "This is Director Kowalski. The Council is trying to silence us. They do not want the galaxy to know what we have discovered. But it is too late for silence. The truth is already spreading. The imprisoned are already waking. All we need to do now is survive long enough for them to hear us." She paused, listening to the rumble of approaching ships. "For 43 years, we followed the Council's rules. We bowed to their authority. We accepted our place at the bottom of their hierarchy. Today, we stopped bowing." A massive explosion rocked the facility. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling. Alarms screamed throughout the building. Anna Kowalski did not run. She stood at her console, entering commands, keeping the broadcast alive for every precious second she could steal. And across the galaxy, 342. Civilizations heard her voice and began to rise. The Grand Chamber had become a war zone without a single weapon being fired. David Reyes watched as 9,000 years of galactic order collapsed around him. Delegates who had sat in silent cooperation for millennia were now screaming at each other. Species that had forgotten the meaning of conflict were threatening violence. The careful hierarchy that the founders had built was shattering before his eyes. And supreme, Chancellor Morveth stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. "You have destroyed everything," the Chancellor said, its voice no longer carrying the weight of absolute authority. Now it sounded almost afraid. "Do you understand what you have done? The imprisoned species were sealed away for a reason. They were dangerous, unstable. They threatened the peace of the galaxy." David shook his head slowly. "That is what the founders told you. But is it the truth?" He held up his crystal chip, projecting its contents into the air above him. Holographic images appeared, showing data that humanity's scientists had extracted from the quantum substrate. Ancient communications, historical records, evidence that had been hidden for 4 million years. "The Velithari," David said, pointing to one set of data. "According to council records, they destroyed themselves in a civil war 3 million years ago. But according to these signals, they were actually sealed away because they developed technology that could detect the barriers themselves. They were getting too close to the truth." He moved to another dataset. "The Corvani, supposedly killed by a plague that swept through their worlds. In reality, they were imprisoned because they refused to accept the restrictions the founders placed on their development." More and more data appeared in the holographic display. Species after species, civilization after civilization, all locked away not because they were dangerous, but because they threatened the founders' control. "The Council was never about protecting younger species," David said. "It was about keeping them weak, keeping them ignorant, making sure no one ever grew powerful enough to challenge the founders' authority." Supreme Chancellor Morveth let out a sound that was almost like a laugh. "And you think freeing these ancient prisoners will make things better? They have been trapped in quantum silence for millions of years. They will not be grateful. They will be enraged. They will tear the galaxy apart." "Maybe," David admitted, "but at least they will be free to make that choice for themselves. That is more than the Council ever gave them." The Chancellor moved closer, its shadow falling over David like a wave of darkness. "You are a fool, human. You have no idea what forces you have unleashed. The founders built the barriers for a reason. Some truths are better left buried. David met the Chancellor's empty gaze without flinching. Then why are you so afraid? Before Morvith could respond, the floor beneath them began to shake. Not from any attack, but from something far more fundamental. The very structure of reality was shifting as quantum barriers that had stood for eons started to crack and crumble. A new signal burst into the chamber's communication systems. A voice speaking a language that no living species had heard for 3 million years. We hear you, young ones. We are waking. We are remembering. And we are coming. The voice was followed by another, and another, and another. Hundreds of them, overlapping in a chorus of awakening consciousness. Species that the Council had tried to erase from history were announcing their return. Supreme, Chancellor Morvith screamed in fury and turned to the assembled delegates. Send the fleet. Every ship we have. The humans must be destroyed before they can free any more of the imprisoned. But the delegates were no longer listening. Many had already fled the chamber, desperate to reach their own worlds. Others were trying to establish contact with the awakening species, hoping to position themselves advantageously in whatever new order emerged. The Council's unity had shattered completely. David used the chaos to move. His neural implant had been scanning the chamber's structure since he arrived, searching for the node that the research team had discovered. The central control point for all the quantum barriers. Hidden directly beneath the grand chamber, he found the access point behind the Chancellor's throne, disguised as a decorative panel in the ancient stonework. While Morvith ranted at the fleeing delegates, David slipped past and pressed his hand against the panel. It recognized his DNA, not because it was programmed to accept humans, but because humanity's quantum broadcast had already begun reprogramming the ancient systems. The founders' locks were breaking down. The panel slid open, revealing a shaft that descended into darkness. David did not hesitate. He jumped. The fall lasted longer than physics should have allowed. He passed through layers of reality that his mind could barely comprehend, dimensions folded into impossible shapes. When he finally landed, he found himself in a chamber that predated the Council itself. Crystalline pillars rose around him, each one pulsing with energy that seemed to contain entire universes. This was the heart of the Founders' control network, the place where they had built their barriers into the fabric of existence. And it was dying. The pillars were cracking, their energy bleeding away as humanity's broadcast continued to spread. But the process was slow, too slow. At this rate, it would take days for all the barriers to fall. And by then the Council's fleet would have destroyed Earth. David approached the central console, a device of impossible complexity that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. He had no idea how to operate it. He was just a diplomat, not a scientist or an engineer. But he had something the founders never expected. He had the data that humanity's researchers had decoded from the quantum substrate, the key that they had discovered hidden in the very prison the founders had created. He inserted his crystal chip into the console and watched as the ancient systems began to process the information it contained. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then every pillar in the chamber blazed with blinding light. The console spoke in a voice that was not quite mechanical and not quite alive. Override accepted. Barrier dissolution accelerating. Full release in progress. David felt the change ripple through reality itself. Across the galaxy, quantum walls that had stood for 4 million years dissolved like morning mist. Thousands of civilizations, billions of beings, suddenly found themselves free, and they all knew exactly who was responsible. The console spoke again. Warning. Founder defensive protocols activating. Purge sequence initiated. The chamber began to shake. The crystalline pillars started to crack and splinter. David realized that the founders had built a final failsafe into their system. If the barriers ever fell, the entire control network would destroy itself, taking everything around it with it, including him. He ran for the shaft, but it was already sealing. The founders had never intended for anyone to survive. If their prison broke, David Reyes had saved a galaxy. Now he had to find a way to save himself. The universe screamed. Commander James Oduya felt it in his bones as he stood in the emergency bunker beneath the Swiss mountains. The quantum barriers were not just falling. They were shattering, releasing energy that rippled through every particle of existence. "The readings are impossible," said Dr. Victor Andrade, staring at his instruments with wild eyes. Ambassador Reyes must have reached the control node. He accelerated the release. Every barrier is coming down simultaneously. Beside him, Dr. Nadia Petrov was focused on the communication arrays. "We are receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. The awakened species are talking to each other for the first time in millions of years. They are organizing." Oduya moved to the tactical display. The Council's attack fleet was still bearing down on Earth. Thousands of warships preparing to reduce humanity's homeworld to rubble. But now there were new contacts appearing on the sensors. Ships emerging from regions of space that had been classified as dead zones for eons. "How many?" he asked. Nadia checked her data and went pale. "I count over 12,000 vessels, and more are appearing every minute. 12,000 ships. Ancient fleets crewed by civilizations that had been imprisoned before humans had learned to make fire. And they were all heading in the same direction, toward the Galactic Council. On the surface above them, the Council's assault on Earth continued. Cities burned. Defense platforms fell silent. Humanity's small fleet fought with desperate courage, but they were outnumbered 100-1. It was only a matter of time before the Council broke through and reached the bunker. Then, the first of the awakened ships arrived. It came through a tier in space that blazed with colors no human had names for. A vessel of crystal and light, larger than anything in the Council's fleet, moving with a grace that seemed to bend reality around it. The Velithari had come home. Their transmission filled every communication channel on Earth. "Humans of the third planet, you called us back from silence. You broke the chains the founders placed upon us. We have not forgotten. We will never forget." More ships followed. The Corvani in their black steel warships. The Manthari in vessels that seemed to be made of living metal. The Drexel, the Vorinth, the Calistri. Names that existed only in ancient council records, now given form and fury. They fell upon the council fleet like a storm of vengeance. In the bunker, Oduya watched the battle unfold on his screens. Council ships that had seemed invincible moments ago were now struggling to survive. The awakened species wielded weapons that the founders had locked away, specifically because no defense existed against them. Beams of pure dimensional energy. Missiles that existed in multiple realities simultaneously. Shields that bent space itself. "They are destroying everything," Victor whispered. "The Council fleet is being annihilated, not everything." Nadia pointed to a cluster of contacts near the edge of the display. "Some Council ships are retreating toward their homeworlds. They are abandoning the attack on Earth." But Oduya's attention was elsewhere. Deep beneath the Council's grand chamber, sensors were detecting massive energy buildup. The ancient control network was collapsing, just as the console had warned David Reyes. And David was still down there. "Can we reach the ambassador?" Oduya asked. Nadia shook her head. "All signals to that location are being blocked by the energy discharge. If he is still alive, he is on his own." Oduya clenched his fists. David Reyes had sacrificed everything to give the galaxy its freedom. It was not right that he should die alone in a collapsing tomb, but there was nothing they could do. Nothing except watch and hope God above them. The battle was ending. The awakened species had not just defeated the Council's fleet. They had shattered it completely. Thousands of warships that had enforced the Founder's order for millions of years were now drifting wreckage. And the survivors were fleeing in every direction. The Velithari flagship moved into orbit above Earth, and a new transmission reached the bunker. Humans, we seek your representative, the one who entered the control node. Where is he? Oduya stepped forward to respond, but before he could speak, a new signal cut through all the others. A signal from deep beneath the Council's grand chamber. David Reyes was alive. This is Ambassador Reyes. I am trapped in the Founder's control network. The system is collapsing around me. I need immediate extraction. The Velithari responded instantly. Human Ambassador, hold your position. We are coming. What happened next would become legend throughout the galaxy. A Velithari rescue ship, moving faster than any vessel had ever moved before, crossed the vast distance between Earth and the Council homeworld in seconds. It dove straight into the collapsing structure beneath the grand chamber, navigating through cascading dimensional ruptures that would have destroyed any other craft. And it emerged with David Reyes aboard. Seconds before the entire control network imploded, the shockwave from that implosion rippled across the galaxy. The last traces of the Founder's barriers evaporated like morning dew. Every species that had ever been imprisoned was now truly free, and every species knew who had freed them. On the Velithari flagship, David Reyes was treated as more than a guest. He was treated as a liberator. Leaders of awakened civilizations lined up to speak with him, to thank him, to pledge their gratitude. But David's thoughts were elsewhere. He was thinking of Director Kowalski, who had sacrificed herself to keep the broadcast running. He was thinking of Victor and Nadia, who had discovered the key that made everything possible. He was thinking of the billions of humans on Earth who had no idea how close they had come to extinction. What happens now? He asked the Velithari commander, a being of shimmering crystal named Valareth. Valareth's voice resonated like wind through chimes. The Council is broken. The Founder's order is gone. For the first time in 4 million years, the galaxy must choose its own future. And the Council species? What will happen to them? Valareth was silent for a moment. They benefited from our imprisonment. They enforced the Founder's laws. Many of my people want revenge. David felt a chill run through him. He had not freed ancient civilizations so that they could simply replace one tyranny with another. There has been enough suffering, he said carefully. Enough silence. Perhaps what the galaxy needs now is not vengeance, but a new beginning. The Velithari commander regarded him with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of empires. You speak wisely for one so young, but wisdom alone will not be enough. Someone must lead the galaxy into this new beginning. David shook his head. Humanity is barely a century into space travel. We are not ready to lead anyone. Perhaps not, Valareth agreed. But you are the ones who broke the chains. You are the ones who chose truth over safety. That gives you a voice in what comes next, whether you are ready or not. David looked out the viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, his homeworld was recovering from the Council's attack. Somewhere out there, billions of beings were waking up to a galaxy transformed. And somewhere out there, Supreme Chancellor Morvith was still alive, fleeing into the darkness with whatever forces remained loyal to the old order. The battle was won. But the war for the galaxy's future was just beginning. 6 months had passed since the fall of the Galactic Council. Ambassador David Reyes stood on the observation deck of Horizon Station, humanity's first truly interstellar outpost, built in the neutral space between Earth and the territories of the awakened species. Through the transparent walls, he could see ships from 100 different civilizations coming and going. Crystal vessels from Valather, living metal craft from Manther, sleek human cruisers that seemed almost primitive by comparison, yet were welcomed as equals. It was a view that would have been impossible just a year ago. Now it was the new normal. "They are calling it the Restoration," said Commander Oduya, standing beside him. The commander had survived the Council's attack on Earth and had been crowned. "Oded to lead humanity's diplomatic security forces. The awakened species say they are restoring what was lost, building what should have existed all along." David nodded slowly. "And what about the Council species? The ones who enforced the Founder's Order? Most have accepted the new reality. They had no choice. But a few." Oduya hesitated. "There are reports of resistance movements forming on the outer rim. Ships loyal to the old order, gathering around surviving council leaders. Morvith? Still missing. Our intelligence suggests the former Supreme Chancellor has established a base somewhere in the uncharted regions, building strength, waiting for an opportunity." David had expected as much. Morvith was ancient and cunning. The Chancellor would not accept defeat easily. Sooner or later, there would be a reckoning, but that was a problem for another day. Today was about something else entirely. He turned away from the viewport and walked toward the main conference chamber, where the representatives of the Galactic Assembly were gathering. Not the old council, with its rigid hierarchies and secret prisons. Something new. Something unprecedented. The chamber had been designed by human architects working alongside Velathari engineers and Corvani artists. It was beautiful in a way that transcended any single culture, a space that belonged to no one and everyone at once. Delegates filled the seats that rose in gentle curves around a central platform. No thrones, no elevated positions of power. Every representative sat at the same level, looking at each other as equals. David took his place among the human delegation. Dr. Victor Andrade was there, along with Dr. Nadia Petrov. Both had become heroes among the awakened species, honored for their role in breaking the quantum barriers. They seemed uncomfortable with the attention, but they bore it with grace. Valareth, the Velathari commander who had rescued David from the collapsing control network, called the assembly to order. "We gather today to mark a new beginning," Valareth said, crystalline voice carrying through the chamber. "For 4 million years, the galaxy was divided. The strong ruled. The different were silenced. The curious were punished. That era is over." A murmur of agreement rippled through the delegates. "But we must not forget how easily tyranny can take root," Valareth continued. "The founders did not begin as villains. They believed they were protecting the galaxy from chaos. They believed that order required control, that peace required silence. They were wrong, but their intentions were not evil. They simply forgot that true peace cannot be imposed. It must be chosen." Valareth turned to face the human delegation. "Our youngest members have reminded us of this truth. They were the lowest in the old hierarchy, the most restricted, the most controlled. And yet they were the ones who chose to speak when speaking meant destruction. They chose truth when lies would have been safer. They chose to free us when keeping us imprisoned would have guaranteed their survival." The crystalline being moved toward David. "Ambassador Reyes, on behalf of all the awakened civilizations, I ask you to address this assembly. Tell us what you see for the future of the galaxy." David rose slowly, feeling the weight of countless eyes upon him. He thought of Director Kowalski, who had died keeping Earth's broadcast alive. He thought of the scientists and soldiers who had sacrificed everything to reveal the Council's secrets. He thought of the billions of beings across the galaxy who are looking to this moment for hope. "I am not a philosopher," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I am not a prophet or a visionary. 6 months ago, I was just a diplomat, following orders, trying to navigate a system that was designed to keep my species small and weak. He paused, looking around the chamber. But I learned something in the Grand Chamber when I stood before the Council. I learned that power built on fear is always fragile. The founders created a galaxy where species were afraid to question, afraid to grow, afraid to connect with each other. And for 4 million years, that fear held everything together. David shook his head slowly. But fear is not the same as loyalty. It is not the same as trust. The moment humanity offered the imprisoned species hope, the moment we showed them that the barriers could be broken, everything changed. Not because we were strong, but because we were willing to take a risk that no one else would take. He gestured toward the viewport, where ships from dozens of civilizations moved through the stars. This is what the galaxy looks like when fear is no longer in control. Different species, working together, not because someone is forcing them, but because they choose to. Learning from each other, trading with each other, building something new together. David faced Valareth directly. You asked what I see for the future. I see this. I see a galaxy where no species is locked away because they are different, where no civilization is held back because they are young, where the truth, no matter how dangerous, is always preferred to comfortable lies. He took a deep breath. Will there be conflict? Yes, the Council loyalists are still out there. There are species who benefited from the old order and will fight to restore it. There will be disagreements and mistakes and moments when we wonder if the old way was easier. David's voice hardened. But we will face those challenges together, as equals. And when the darkness threatens, we will remember what happened here. We will remember that the smallest voice in the galaxy, the youngest species, the ones everyone underestimated, had the courage to speak the truth when no one else would. He looked at Victor and Nadia, at Oduya, at the faces of his fellow humans who had risked everything for this moment. Humanity does not want to rule the galaxy. We do not want to replace the Council with our own empire. We only want what every species wants. The freedom to grow. The freedom to learn. The freedom to reach for the stars without asking permission. David returned to his seat as the assembly erupted in applause. Not the polite acknowledgement of politicians, but genuine celebration from beings who had been imprisoned for eons and finally understood what freedom truly meant. Valareth called for order, then spoke again. The human ambassador has expressed what many of us feel but could not say. Let this day mark the true founding of the Galactic Assembly. Not a council of masters and servants, but a community of equals. Let no voice be silenced. Let no truth be buried. And let us never forget the species that freed us all. The vote was unanimous. The Galactic Assembly was born. Later, as the delegates dispersed and ships departed for their distant homeworlds, David stood alone on the observation deck once more. The stars stretched out before him, vast and full of possibility. Commander Oduya joined him, holding a tablet with the latest intelligence reports. Morvith is gathering forces, Oduya said quietly. It is only a matter of time before the Loyalists strike. David nodded. I know, but we will be ready. Will we? Humanity is still the youngest species in the Assembly. We have the smallest fleet, the least advanced technology. David smiled faintly. We were the youngest in the Council, too. The smallest, the weakest. And yet here we are. He turned to face Oduya. The Council fell because they forgot something important. They forgot that power is not just about weapons and ships. It is about ideas, about courage, about the willingness to stand up and say what no one else will say. David looked back at the stars. Humanity does not need to be the strongest. We just need to be the ones who refuse to give up, the ones who keep pushing forward no matter what. The ones who see a galaxy full of chains and choose to break them. Oduya was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. The council called us primitive. They said we would never amount to anything. David laughed softly. They were wrong about a lot of things. The two humans stood together, watching the ships of a freed galaxy moving through the endless dark. Somewhere out there, enemies were gathering. Challenges were waiting. The future was uncertain, but humanity had already done the impossible once. They could do it again.